welcome back to the Execution Gap. I am Mohammad Yunus, host of this show, and someone who has spent the last several years sitting inside the room where transformation decisions are made across Saudi Arabia and GCC. My guest today has spent 25 years documenting what happens when those decisions goes wrong. From the outside, he has been an expert witness in ERP legislation, covered by CBS News and the Wall Street Journal, authored a book called Welcome to the Machine, launching this month, and built one of the most respected independent ERP advisory firms in the world. What we are going to do today is to put his framework against my field evidence. He names the machine from the outside. I have been operating inside. The gap between those two positions, that is the conversations. Eric Kimberling, welcome to the Execution Gap.
Hello, thank you for having me, Ahmed.
Eric, the GCC is deploying $3 trillion into the transformation right now. NEOM, ROSHN, and the Giga-Projects. Based on everything you know, is that the world's largest ongoing ERP failure in progress, or it is the largest opportunity to finally get it right?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it is the biggest opportunity to get it right. I think if we look at it optimistically, half glass full, I think it is the opportunity for us to finally get it right. And the good news is that we have years and decades of history and mistakes and lessons that we should be drawing from. So hopefully more organizations look to the mistakes and to the lessons of other organizations to learn how to be successful in their digital transformations.
What is the single variable that determine which of those two it becomes?
That's a great question. I would say, if I had to pick one thing that is the most important, I would say can I say two things? Maybe there's two. I can't narrow it to one thing, but if I had to pick two things, I would say one thing is to make sure that you're aligned as an organization with what the purpose and the strategy of the transformation is, because a lot of times organizations don't have a clear vision or understanding of what it is they're trying to accomplish. They think that because a vendor told them that their software is being sunset and maintenance is going to be discontinued, that they just have to implement or they have to upgrade now. And that's okay. That's a starting point, but they need a very clear business justification for why they are embarking on the transformation journey. So that would be the first thing, is to have a clear vision, understanding, and alignment around what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then the second thing I would say, as far as a key to be successful, is to ensure that you have realistic expectations. So, a lot of times, most teams that we work with don't fully understand how much time, effort, and budget it's going to take to do the job and to do the job right. So to have those realistic expectations is very important, because if you have unrealistic expectations and you expect that the project can be compressed into a short timeline, or it's going to cost you less money than it really will, then what ends up happening is you end up making a bunch of bad decisions out of necessity. You end up having to choose to cut things like extra rounds or extra iterations of testing, or maybe you cut change management. Maybe you decrease the time of design. You decrease the time for testing and training. All those things compress and lead to shortcuts that might sound good in theory, but they end up creating a lot more problems later on than they solve. So I'd say the two things, if I had to pick the two things, would be ensure you have the internal alignment and justification and purpose for the project, but also to have realistic expectations for the project.
Great. So, Eric, I want to give you a piece of field evidence before I ask this question. So, a CFO at Saudi Giga-Project, I will not name the organization. It's like usual bumps in a board report. So, in 6 months of report, before his board discovered the system has not functioning as declared, the go live has been celebrated. The press release had gone out and the consultant had been paid. So Lamb Weston used the same phrase to the investor, same pattern, different angle. Is a usual bumps a communication failure or a governance architecture failure?
That's a good question. Do I have to pick one? I'd say it's both. It's both a communication and a governance breakdown. And also, back to the previous point or back to the previous question, it's also a lack of definition of what success means, because when you go into a project like this, you can't just say that if I go live on time or on budget, that is success. I mean, that is one measure, but it's only one measure of success. You also have to look at how it impacts your operations and how it impacts your people and your organization. So I would say that um, that it's is partially not fully understanding and articulating what the purpose of the implementation is and what the definition of success is, but it's also not having that clear not having that clear definition along the way.
Great. I wanted to speak on the book thesis. So you say that the machine is designed to profit from failure. In Saudi Arabia, the machines arrived from Europe and the North America, SAP, Oracle, the Big Four. But here is what a different from every case you have documented. There is no pension fund to file a lawsuit. There is a sovereign immunity. And when the failure is absorbed, the same consultant move to the next giga project. So what happens when a structurally broken consulting model meets to the unlimited sovereign capital and no independent oversight?
That's a really good question. And actually, until you just mentioned that, I had never thought of that specific angle. I mean, that's a very unique nuance to the machine. The machine was built to profit from organizations like Saudi organizations, to be candid. I mean, that's what the machine is designed for. It's designed for high spending with limited accountability. So, unfortunately, for Saudi companies, I mean that is a problem, and I have to be careful how I say this. I don't want to be too critical of any one person or any organization or any culture. But if you look at organizations in general across the world, not just in Saudi, across the world, the problem is that not enough organizations hold the software vendors and the system integrators accountable. And you add to that fact that not enough organizations have the maturity and knowledge and sophistication to know that they need to hold them accountable. A lot of times people think that because the experts are going to come in and help you, those experts are looking out for your best interest. And the unfortunate problem and the unfortunate fact is that most consulting firms are aligned with and profit from software vendors. So, in other words, software vendors are going to reward the consulting firms for doing what you just described, to go into a Saudi firm who may or may not hold the consulting firm accountable. Their sole purpose or their primary purpose is to sell more software, to implement the software as quickly as possible, regardless of business outcome. So I think if I'm an organization, or if I'm a leader within a Saudi organization, I would say, look, the government, the Saudi organization, the Saudi sovereign fund may not fully understand the details of what's happening here on this project, but it's my job as a leader to ensure that we are good stewards of the resources and the budget and the people. You also have to look at the people that report to you and how it impacts them. There's a lot of people and stakeholders that have indirect and informal impact from the results of a digital transformation. So even if the Saudi sovereign fund doesn't, it doesn't hold the vendors accountable, you as a leader are going to be responsible for doing so. So I think that's maybe a different way of thinking about it, or a nuance that's very unique to the Saudi Arabian economy.
So, Eric, your research says that 55 to 75% of the transformation failed. I want to suggest the number in the GCC is higher, not because the implementations are worse, but because the failure is never declared. Because the system goes live, the board is told that it is succeeded. The CFO still cannot give the real-time cash position 2 years later. Nobody calls it failure. The consultant gets the next contract, and hidden failures versus the declared failure, which is more expensive and why?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it is more expensive to have a call it an under the radar failure, an informal failure or a failure that hasn't necessarily been designated as an official failure. Those are the most expensive ones, because honestly, if you look at, if you have a massive failure, like you just can't go live, or you aren't able to fix the problems with the system in a timely manner, those are expensive and painful, but at least you know that there's a problem. The software doesn't work. And that in some ways is better, because at least you know, and you can see and touch and feel the fact that there's a problem. That's pretty rare, though, because most failures aren't big, massive disasters. I mean, most of them are more moderate failures. And those moderate failures are actually sometimes harder and more expensive, because they lead you to believe that things are better than they really are. They make you think that things are okay. I can go live and it's not going to be that difficult. But when I go live, if it is difficult, it creates operational disruption, then that's the real expense. That's the real cost, is if I can't ship product, if I can't close the books, if I can't pay my people. There's regulatory issues. There's obviously morale and cultural issues that come with that. If I can't ship products, my customers are upset. So those costs that come after go live, those are the really big costs. And a lot of times organizations think that things are okay or good enough to go live. So I'll go live and I'll figure it out later, is a mentality that commonly leads to a lot more cost and a lot more risk.
That's right. That's right. So last question, I want you to take as long as you need. What is the single question a CFO anywhere in the world should ask before the contract is signed, before the vendor is selected, or before the first consultant arrives, that changes the outcome?
Well, if I had to pick a single question that maybe you could ask multiple times, it would be why. Why do I need this piece of software? And when I say this, by the way, and I have to say this in a way that's culturally sensitive, because a lot of cultures and a lot of people just don't want confrontation. They don't want to offend people. They want to show respect. So sometimes they don't challenge the people to say, well, why? Not in a combative way, not in a disrespectful way, but you could say, why? Why do we need to implement this module? Why do we need to change? Or why do we need to implement now? Why do you need to have 50 people on this project supporting this? Do we need them all now? Could we have some of them come later? Just ask why and be inquisitive. I think that's the key thing, is for organizations that are successful, they take a lot more ownership, and they just take responsibility, ownership, and accountability for the projects, even if your software vendor or your consultant or your system integrator are telling you one thing. It's okay to ask why. Help me understand why that is. Why is this okay? And just dig in and understand, take ownership. And because ultimately, if the vendor or this consultant is wrong, it's not their fault necessarily. It's your fault. I mean, you as the leader in an organization have to take accountability for that.
100%. So last but not the least, I wanted to jump on the rapid fire. I wanted to close with 5 quick ones, 1 or 2 sentences each, completely off the cuff. Okay, so one word for the state of ERP in 2026.
Ooh, good question. I'd say disruption and not the status quo. I don't think the status quo is going to, the way the ERP industry looks today in 2026 is not how it's going to look in 28 or 30. I think it's going to look very different. I think the incumbents will shift. I think the technology itself will shift. I think there's going to be massive tectonic shifts in the next 2 to 3 years.
The phone call every CFO dreads but never makes before signing.
Ooh, before signing the contract. Okay. Well, first of all, I think a lot of them dread the phone calls from the software vendors and the consultants who are trying to sell them software. So I think that alone for a lot of CFOs is disruptive. But I'd say, maybe I'm thinking too far ahead of your question, but I would say, another dreaded phone call for CFOs is just anything that relates to not being able to close the books, not being able to access data, not having visibility. So any indication that there is a threat to that visibility and data access, I think that's a dreaded phone call for any CFO.
If politics and budget were removed from the equation, SAP, Oracle, or D365?
Well, gosh, that's a really hard question because I hate to say it, but I'd have to say it depends. If it's a large organization that really wants to standardize and create a common set of operating tools and operating model, I'd say that's a better fit for SAP. If you're looking for something that is highly flexible and customizable and can integrate with SharePoint and Power BI and Power Apps, then Microsoft D365 is a better fit. And if you're looking for something that's sort of in between, then I'd say that Oracle could be a good fit. So it really depends on what the purpose or the goals and the priorities of the organization are, and also the culture. I think it's a lot of times when people choose and implement technologies, they don't realize how much of an impact it has on your culture. Because if if you implement SAP, for example, we have several clients that are implementing SAP, and it's a big cultural shift. It's a mindset shift. It's a different way of thinking and operating, technology. But that's it could have higher value because it creates a more standard operating model. But if you look at Microsoft D365 as another example, it's very flexible. It's open architecture. You can integrate to third parties. You can customize it a little bit easier than you can SAP. And that's all good, but it also creates the temptation to want to change the software to recreate your old processes or to stay stuck in the past. And then Oracle Fusion is sort of the in between. They're a bit of both. They're flexible, but it's also a bit more standardized than and a bit more scalable than D365. So I almost look at the three solutions as a continuum or a spectrum, depending on where you are as an organization. And I think that's really important to understand because that will have an impact on your culture no matter which of the solutions you implement.
CFO biggest lie in the ERP industry tells itself every single day.
That technology will solve the business problems of their clients on its own. Technology alone will solve the business problems. I think that's the biggest lie or the biggest deception in the industry, because what's interesting right now is technology is better than it's ever been. It's more fascinating, it's more effective, it's more powerful than it's ever been. And that's the irony of what I'm saying, is because technology is better than it's ever been. However, it alone can't solve business problems without changing the operations, without effectively managing change and affecting the human side of things, making sure your internal team is aligned. And in a lot of ways, technology is the least of the problems. It's the last thing that you have to worry about. It's the least biggest problem you have to worry about. It's more about the people, the processes, the operations. Those are the difficult parts of these sorts of projects. And that's where a lot of companies fall short or fail to invest the proper time and budget.
100%. So if a CFO is watching this right now and there is a go live was 6 months ago and something feels wrong, one thing they should do today.
Well, the number one, first and foremost, is listen to your instinct. If what you just said is true, if I'm a CFO, if I'm a leader, and I feel like something's wrong, and I think that something might not quite be right, you're probably correct, and you should probably listen to your gut, listen to your instincts. And even if you're wrong, that's okay. It's okay to ask questions, or to, I would say, even if you're completely wrong and your perceptions or your instincts are incorrect, it's still important to ask the questions to validate that, to make sure that you feel comfortable, because ultimately consultants go away, the vendors go away, the product remains, the software remains, but the vendor support, it goes into the background. And at the end of the day, you are the leader responsible for what happens in the organization. And so to your very beginning question, a lot of times consultants will come in and they have another client that's waiting for their implementations to start. So they want to finish as quickly as possible, and they want to move on to the next project. And it's you you as a leader are the one that's going to be responsible for the outcomes of what that consultant does long after the consultant leaves. Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. It's available right now. as of today on Amazon. So you can order it electronically on Amazon. You can also order a physical hard copy, hardcover, or paperback version. So it'll ship to you anywhere in the world. If you just go to Amazon.com and then search my name, Eric Kimberling, welcome to the machine, you'll find the book there. And it will be launched or officially released on May 1st, but you can pre-order it anytime beginning now. Thank you.